One of the ways you can see films at home right now is what they call virtual cinema or virtual screening rooms or virtual screenings. A lot of movie theaters that are closed during the current pandemic are offering films that you can rent digitally, and some or all of the money goes to them. And it's never all. Some of the money, like any distribution deal, some of it goes to the studio, some of it goes to the theater. So it's a way theaters are getting income while they're closed, and it's a way fans of certain theaters can support them and get a little something in return. The film that I saw in question, I sent my funds to the Somerville Theater in Somerville, Massachusetts, which is a beautiful old Art Deco. I don't know if it's Art Deco. It's a beautiful, gigantic old movie theater in Boston. And it's a documentary from 2018, but I looked it up on the IMDb. It said 2018, but I'd never heard of it until now, so it may actually be a 2020 release. It is entitled The Ghost of Peter Sellers. I've been a big Peter Sellers fan since I was a kid, since I saw Pink Panther Strikes Again at the drive-in as a kid and just fell in love with the Clouseau character in the Pink Panther movies, and I followed his career retrospectively ever since that. This is a documentary from director Peter Medak, who went on to do films, most of which I'm not going to remember right now, other than Zorro the Gay Blade, so you know the guy's got street cred. This is a story of a film he attempted to make, he sort of successfully made with Peter Sellers in the early 70s, called Ghost in the Noonday Sun, which was Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan and Tony Franciosa, about a pirate ship and wacky high seas adventure and treasure and all that other stuff. Apparently it was a very troubled production. I had never heard of that film before I started watching the documentary, so I went into this thing thinking this was a documentary about a film that never got made or never got finished, and that's a whole genre of documentary by itself. But it was a film that did get finished. I don't know how well it was ever released. I know you can find it on video now if you want it. It may be a UK release, it may be a US, I'm not quite sure. But this film, essentially, I heard somebody else say it, so I'm not going to steal the notion. This film is essentially director Peter Medak trying to go through therapy about what a bad time he had on this film with Peter Sellers and just what a disaster the production was. If you ever saw Lost in La Mancha, which is one of the best movies about movies I've ever seen, which was about Terry Gilliam attempting to make The Man Who Killed Don Quixote and that whole thing just falling apart. Ultimately, he did make the film, and you can see it now. This, I thought, was going to be the same thing, and to a degree it is. You see Medak and his crew on an actual sailing vessel trying to shoot on the ocean, and Peter Sellers being a crazy egomaniac and crazy temperamental and trying to sabotage the film while it's going, and Spike Milligan being kind of weird and crazy, and this director who had just done some successful films trying desperately to keep all this together and to please his financial masters and get a film finished that people will like, and it all just comes crashing down around him. So it's structured very interestingly. It's told in a very linear way, and Medak revisits various people who were involved in the film. Now, not all of the cast, sadly, Sellers included, are not with us to talk about this experience anymore, but he goes to like the film financier, and he goes to the producer, and he goes to some of the actors, and just sort of says, you know, am I remembering this right? Was this as much of a disaster as I think? And interestingly, one by one, a lot of them reassure him that, you know, you got to let this stuff go. Because apparently the experience he had on this film, he feels ruined his career. He clearly is still very upset about this thing that happened in the early 70s. And this documentary is him sort of revisiting ghosts of the past, so to speak, revisiting the ghost of Peter Sellers and that memory to a degree, and trying to work through it and make sense out of it and come to terms with this bad experience and move forward. So I'm watching the film, and as I always ask when I'm talking to you about anything, you know, who is this for? Well, obviously it's for Peter Sellers fans because there's a lot of footage of him and a lot of stories about him. I suppose if you're a fan of the director, it's pretty fascinating. If you're somebody who's interested in how movies are made and how they can go right and how they can go very wrong, this film is very interesting. On a human level, I realized partly through this film, it's really a film about loss, and it's a film about trying to reconcile the past and move beyond it. And when you look at it in that way, and some of the people who are talking to Medak in this sort of get into that a little bit, it becomes a very human story. It becomes a very universal story of, if you've lived long enough, odds are there's something you went through, something you had a hand in, or something you were a victim of that unfortunately allows the past to guide your future. And this movie kind of gets into that to a degree. It's more than just about the making of a movie. Now, the making of a movie part's very interesting, and there's some legitimately funny things in this. There's some kind of depressing or troubling things in this, especially if you view Peter Sellers as the guy in the movies, as Clouseau who made you so happy. This shows a side of him that is not so nice, and it attempts to a degree to explain why. Sellers was a very fascinating guy. He was this guy who, by all accounts, there wasn't really much of a Peter Sellers. He wasn't much when he wasn't a character, and he took every opportunity to put on a voice or put on a character and not just be himself on or off camera. If you see interviews with him, it's very rare that he doesn't sort of lapse into voices here and there. It's an interesting study of that man. It's not all about him. It's really, really much more about the director and the production of this film. But I was really interested in this because it hits me on a few levels. It hits me on the Peter Sellers fan. It hits me on filmmaking. It hits me on, oh, that's what the guy who made Zorro the Gay Blade looks like. Side note, found it so hilarious that in the most recent Joker movie, the film basically is saying the last film young Bruce Wayne saw with his parents before they were murdered, thus putting him on the route to becoming Batman, was Zorro the Gay Blade. That'll do a number right. At any rate, I thought The Ghost of Peter Sellers was very interesting, very worth watching if you are willing to watch a movie about the making of a film. It says a lot more about humanity and human nature than the movie making aspect does just by itself. This is one that if you want to support a local theater, local to you, or just pick one, go online, look it up. You can find a way to rent this. When I watched it for the Somerville, they had a promo code going that shaved a lot of money off the cost of the film, so it wasn't that expensive a rental. It was totally worth it to me. It looked really gorgeous on a nice big TV. The footage from the original film has been restored to a nice degree. It makes me kind of want to see this original film. It looks like it's not very good, but it looks odd and interesting. It reminded me a lot of Yellowbeard, which was a film I liked a lot as a kid. At any rate, The Ghost of Peter Sellers, out now in virtual cinemas.